He thought embarrassing her would make him look smarter. But he had no idea he was about to lose control of everything in front of an entire room. The hum of high-powered servers filled the glass-walled operations center as tension hung thick in the air. Rows of ultra-wide monitors flickered with lines of failing code. Red warning alerts stacking one after another like a countdown no one could stop. "We've got less than 30 minutes before the system locks out completely," a senior analyst called out, his voice tight. Jason Miller stood at the center of it all, sleeves rolled up, jaw clenched, fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard with sharp, aggressive precision. He was the lead technician on shift, the one everyone looked to when things went wrong. And right now everything was going wrong. A multi-million-dollar client platform was on the verge of collapse, data streams glitching, backups failing, and every second slipping away like sand through their fingers. Jason exhaled sharply, frustration rising as his commands failed to stabilize the system. "I've got it," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him, and that's when the door opened quietly behind them. Almost unnoticed, Emily Carter stepped inside, her presence subtle, almost invisible against the urgency of the room. She wore a simple gray hoodie, slightly worn at the sleeves, dark jeans, and plain sneakers. Nothing about her appearance matched the high-stakes environment filled with tailored shirts and polished confidence. She paused just inside the doorway, taking in the scene with calm, observant eyes, the kind of stillness that didn't belong in a room moving this fast. One of the junior staff glanced at her briefly before looking away, dismissing her without a second thought. But Jason noticed. His gaze flicked toward her, scanning her from head to toe, and something in his expression shifted instantly from stress to irritation. "You lost?" he called out, his tone cutting through the noise just enough to draw a few smirks from nearby coworkers. Emily didn't react immediately. Her eyes were still on the central monitor where cascading errors painted a clear pattern to anyone who knew how to read them. She took a small step forward, careful, respectful. "I think the rollback script is looping incorrectly," she said softly, her voice calm, almost drowned out by the clicking keyboards and low conversations. But Jason heard it, and he let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind meant to entertain more than respond. "Oh yeah," he said, leaning back slightly in his chair, loud enough now for others to listen. "And where'd you pick that up?" "Tech support videos." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room, a few heads turning now to actually look at her. Really look this time, but not with curiosity, with amusement. Emily stood still, her posture unchanged, no defensiveness, no embarrassment, just that same steady gaze. "If you run it again, it might overwrite the recovery points," she added, just as calmly. And this time Jason turned fully toward her, eyebrows raised, a grin forming that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Listen," he said, his voice slower now, deliberate. "This isn't a beginner problem. We're dealing with a live system pulling over 5 terabytes of data every hour. So why don't you hang back and let the professionals handle it?" A few more chuckles followed. Someone whispered something under their breath, and for a brief moment, the tension in the room shifted from fear to entertainment, but only for a moment, because behind Jason, one of the main monitors flickered violently before freezing, then went completely black. Another followed, then another, one by one. The screens began to drop, the low hum of servers changing pitch, unstable, uncertain, and just like that, the laughter died. The room fell into a different kind of silence, not empty, but heavy, charged, the kind that presses against your chest. Jason turned back to his screen, the confidence in his posture tightening, cracking just slightly at the edges. "What the hell?" he muttered, fingers hovering as the system refused to respond the way it should, commands delayed, then ignored. Behind him, Emily took one more step forward, her voice still calm, but now it carried differently in the quiet. "If you keep running that script, you're going to lose everything." And this time, no one laughed. Jason did not turn around immediately, but the way his fingers froze above the keyboard said everything. The confidence that had filled the room just seconds ago was now cracking under pressure. "I said I have it," he snapped, louder this time, as if volume could restore control, but the system did not respond to tone. It responded to logic, and right now, logic was slipping away from him. Another alert flashed across the remaining screens. A cascading failure warning that spread like a ripple through the network. Someone in the back whispered, "We are losing nodes." And that was when Jason exhaled sharply and slammed a command into the terminal, forcing another rollback attempt. The screen flickered violently, lines of code racing, then stuttering, then freezing, and for a split second, it looked like it might stabilize, until it did not. The error logs multiplied, red text stacking faster than anyone could read, and the low hum of the servers deepened into something unstable, something unpredictable. Emily watched quietly, her eyes scanning the patterns, not the noise, but the structure beneath it, the kind of structure most people missed when panic took over. She stepped closer now, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain. "You are overriding your own recovery points," she said again, a little clearer this time, and now the room was listening, not because they trusted her, but because nothing else was working. Jason turned in his chair, finally facing her fully, his expression tight, defensive. "You do not even know what system this is," he said, his voice low but sharp. "This is a distributed architecture handling millions of transactions per hour. You cannot just walk in and start guessing." Emily did not react to the tone. She simply looked at the screen, then back at him. "It is not guessing," she replied, calm. "Steady. You are triggering a loop between the backup index and the live database. Every time you run that script, you are deleting the last safe state." The words hung in the air, technical, precise, and for a brief moment, no one spoke. A senior engineer glanced at Jason, then back at the monitor, uncertainty creeping in. Jason let out a short laugh again, but it was thinner now, forced. "That is not how this system works," he said, though he did not sound entirely convinced. Behind him, another screen went black, then another, the room dimming slightly as more displays dropped offline. The analyst who had been monitoring traffic stepped back, his voice tight. "We just lost another cluster." The weight of that sentence settled over everyone. Jason turned back to his terminal, his posture stiff, shoulders tense. He typed another command, hesitated, then stopped, his fingers hovering again. The same command Emily had warned about, and this time, the hesitation lasted longer, just a second. But enough. Emily stepped forward again, now standing just behind him, close enough to see the exact line of code on his screen. "If you run that again," she said quietly, "there will be nothing left to recover." Her voice was not loud, but it cut through everything else. The room went completely still. Even the background conversations faded. The only sound was the uneven hum of the servers and the faint clicking of someone nervously tapping their desk. Jason swallowed, his jaw tightening, the pressure now visible in every movement. He looked at the screen, then at the surrounding team, then back at Emily, and for the first time, there was something different in his eyes. Not respect, not yet, but doubt. Real doubt. "So what?" he said slowly, almost reluctantly. "You think you can fix it?" The question came out sharper than he intended. Like a challenge, like a last attempt to hold on to control. Emily met his gaze, steady, unshaken. "I know I can stop it," she replied, and the room held its breath. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of her words settled into the room like a pressure no one could ignore. Jason stared at her, searching for hesitation, for uncertainty, for anything that would confirm what he still wanted to believe, that she was out of her depth. But her expression did not change, calm, focused, almost detached from the tension around them. One of the senior engineers shifted slightly, glancing between them, then at the frozen screens. "We are out of time," he muttered, under his breath, and that was enough to tilt the balance. Jason leaned back in his chair slowly, his jaw tight. "Fine," he said, the word clipped, reluctant. "You have 60 seconds. A few people exchanged looks, surprised, uncertain, but no one argued, because there was nothing left to lose. Emily stepped forward without hesitation, sliding into the chair Jason had just vacated, her movements smooth, practiced, as if she had done this 100 times before. Her fingers rested on the keyboard for a fraction of a second, not rushing, not panicking, just aligning with the system in front of her. Then she began to type, not fast at first, but precise, deliberate. Each command entered with clarity. The terminal responded instantly, lines of code appearing in clean, controlled sequences, different from the chaotic attempts before. Someone leaned in slightly, whispering, What is she doing? But no one answered, because no one fully understood it yet. Emily navigated through layers of the system like she knew exactly where everything was, isolating processes, rerouting commands, stopping the loop that had been silently destroying their data. The error logs slowed. Not gone, but no longer multiplying. The servers adjusted, their unstable hum leveling out just enough to notice. Jason stood just behind her now, arms crossed. But the tension in his posture had shifted. He was watching closely, trying to follow her logic, but every step she took was 2 moves ahead of where he had been. She paused for a brief second, her eyes scanning the terminal, then entered a new command, one no one else had tried. The system froze again, and the room held its breath. A few seconds passed, long enough for doubt to creep back in. Someone exhaled nervously, and then, the first screen flickered back to life, not with errors, but with stable data streams, clean, consistent. Another screen followed, then another. The black displays began to glow again, one by one, like lights turning back on in a dark building. The hum of the servers shifted again, this time steady, controlled. The chaos that had filled the room just minutes ago began to dissolve into stunned silence. No one spoke, no one moved. They just watched as the system stabilized under her hands. Emily continued typing, finishing the sequence with the same calm precision she had started with, until finally, she stopped, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard as the last error cleared from the screen. She leaned back slightly, not dramatically, just enough to signal that she was done. The room stayed silent, the kind of silence that follows something no one expected to see. Jason blinked, his eyes fixed on the monitors, then on the terminal, then slowly back to her, trying to process what had just happened. One of the analysts spoke first, barely above a whisper. It is stable. Another checked the system metrics, voice trembling slightly. All nodes are back online. A third added, louder now, data integrity is holding. The words spread through the room like a realization no one could ignore. Emily stood up quietly, stepping away from the chair as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred, but every eye followed her now, not with amusement, not with dismissal, but with something entirely different. Jason remained where he was, frozen in place, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by something heavier, something quieter, and as the system continued running smoothly behind them, one question lingered in every mind. The same question Jason could not bring himself to ask out loud. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted slowly, like the room itself was trying to catch up to what had just happened. Screens that had been dead minutes ago now displayed stable metrics, clean graphs, normal operations, the kind of calm that only exists after something almost went very wrong. One of the analysts leaned closer to his monitor, refreshing the dashboard twice, as if expecting the nightmare to return. But it did not. Everything is holding, he said again, louder this time. And now others began to move, checking logs, verifying data, confirming what they were all starting to accept, that the system was not just running. It was fully recovered. Jason remained still, his eyes fixed on the terminal Emily had used, his mind replaying every step she had taken, every command, every decision, trying to find the moment where he lost control, and she took it. But there was no single moment. It had been a shift, subtle, precise, undeniable. He let out a slow breath, turning slightly toward her. But the words did not come, not yet. Across the room, a manager stepped forward, drawn by the sudden change in energy. His eyes scanned the monitors, then the team, then landed on Emily. Who fixed it? He asked, his voice sharp with urgency that had not yet caught up to relief. No one answered immediately. They simply looked, and then one by one, their attention moved toward her. The manager followed their gaze, studying her appearance, the hoodie, the sneakers, the calm posture that did not match the magnitude of what had just happened. You? He asked, not dismissive, but surprised. Emily nodded slightly. Nothing more, no explanation, no attempt to claim credit. Just a simple acknowledgement. The manager stepped closer, his expression shifting as he processed the situation. What exactly did you do? He asked. And this time, there was curiosity, not doubt. Emily glanced briefly at the screen, then back at him. The rollback loop was overriding the last valid state, she said, her voice even. I isolated the process, restored a clean index, and redirected the recovery sequence. The explanation was concise, precise, and for those who understood, it was enough to explain everything. The manager blinked once, then nodded slowly, clearly recognizing the level of control that required. That is not a beginner fix, he said quietly, almost to himself. Behind him, Jason finally moved, stepping forward, his posture no longer rigid, but measured. He looked at Emily, really looked this time, not at her clothes, not at her presence, but at her, the person who had just done what he could not. Where did you learn to do that? He asked, his voice lower now, stripped of the earlier edge. Emily met his gaze, calm as before. Experience, she replied. A simple answer that did not invite further explanation. The room remained quiet, but the silence had changed. It was no longer heavy with tension. It was filled with something else, something closer to realization, the kind that settles slowly but does not leave. The manager reached for a tablet, pulling up internal records, his fingers moving quickly as he searched. What is your name? He asked, and for the first time, the question felt important. Emily did not hesitate. Emily Carter, she said, and the moment the name left her lips, something shifted again. The manager's eyes paused on the screen, his expression tightening slightly, then changing entirely as recognition set in. He looked back at her, then at the tablet again, confirming what he was seeing, and when he spoke next, his voice carried a different weight. Emily Carter, senior engineer from Orion Systems. The words landed in the room like a quiet shock, a ripple that moved through everyone present. Jason's expression froze, the realization hitting him all at once. Every comment, every laugh, every dismissal replaying in his mind with a clarity that was impossible to ignore. Emily did not react to the title. She did not correct it, did not expand on it. She simply stood there, steady, unchanged, as if none of it had altered who she was. But everything in the room had already changed around her. Jason lowered his gaze for a brief moment, then looked back at her. The confidence that had once filled his voice replaced by something quieter, something more honest. But before he could say anything, Emily spoke first, her voice calm, measured. Next time, she said, not loud, but impossible to miss. You should listen before you laugh. And once again, the room went completely silent. Jason did not speak right away, and that silence said more than anything he could have said. The confidence that once filled his posture had completely dissolved, replaced by something quieter, something reflective, the kind of stillness that only comes when reality forces its way through pride. Around the room, people slowly returned to their stations, but no one moved the same way as before. Their glances shifted, their voices lowered. The energy had changed, not chaotic anymore, not dismissive either, but aware, sharply aware of what they had just witnessed. The manager straightened slightly, regaining his professional tone, but there was a subtle respect in his voice now as he looked at Emily. We were minutes away from losing everything, he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Emily gave a small nod. About 20 minutes, she replied calmly, her eyes briefly scanning the stabilized system. Maybe less if the loop had continued. The manager exhaled, slowly, absorbing that, then looked back at the screens, as if seeing them differently now. You just saved a contract worth over $5 million, he said, and this time, the weight of those numbers settled into the room, not as pressure, but as realization. Someone in the back let out a quiet whistle. Another shook his head slightly. Still processing, Jason shifted his stance, uncrossing his arms, his hands now resting at his sides. Uncertain what to do with them, he glanced at the terminal again, then back at Emily, the earlier version of himself, the one who had laughed, who had dismissed her without a second thought, felt distant now, almost unfamiliar. He took a small step forward, his voice lower than before. I did not see it, he admitted, not loudly, not for the room, but for her. Emily looked at him, her expression unchanged, not judgmental, not forgiving either, just steady. You were not looking for it, she said simply, and that sentence landed deeper than anything else had. Jason nodded once, slowly, accepting it without argument. Around them, the team continued verifying systems, but their attention still drifted back, drawn to the quiet center of the moment. The manager glanced again at his tablet, then back at Emily. We were not informed you would be on site today, he said, curiosity returning. Emily adjusted her sleeve slightly. Casual, unbothered. I was not scheduled, she replied. I was here for a different meeting. The simplicity of that answer made a few people exchange looks. The idea that someone of her level had just been walking through the building unnoticed felt almost unreal. The manager let out a short breath, then gave a small nod. Well, he said, choosing his words carefully now. I think it is safe to say this was the most important meeting of the day. A few quiet chuckles followed, not mocking this time, but respectful, measured. Jason allowed himself a faint, almost reluctant smile at that, then looked back at Emily. You handled that like you have seen it before, he said, and this time, there was no challenge in his voice, only genuine curiosity. Emily paused for a brief second, as if deciding how much to say, then answered. Systems fail in predictable ways, she said. People just do not always recognize the pattern in time. Jason absorbed that, his eyes shifting slightly as he replayed the sequence again in his mind, seeing now what he had missed before. The manager straightened again, returning fully to his role, but still watching her with quiet respect. If you are not already leading a team, he said, you probably should be. Emily gave a small, almost amused exhale. Not quite a laugh. Titles do not fix systems, she replied, and for a moment, that line lingered in the air, simple, but undeniable. Jason looked at her again, this time with a clarity he had not had before, not measuring her, not judging her, just understanding, even if only partially. And as the room settled into its new normal, one thing remained clear to everyone present. Respect was not something you assigned based on appearance. It was something you learned the hard way when you realized you had underestimated the wrong person. The room did not return to normal, not completely, because something had shifted beneath the surface, something that could not be undone. The monitors continued to display stable metrics. The systems hummed with quiet consistency, but the people inside the room were no longer the same as they had been an hour ago. Jason moved back toward his station slowly, not with the same urgency as before, but with a measured awareness. He sat down, his eyes scanning the code on his screen, and for the first time that day, he did not rush to type. He studied it, carefully, deliberately, as if trying to relearn something he thought he had already mastered. Across the room, Emily stood near the glass wall, her posture relaxed, her attention no longer fixed on the crisis that had just passed, but on something quieter, something internal. The manager approached her again, this time without urgency, his voice lower, more thoughtful. You could have said who you were when you walked in, he said, not accusing, just observing. Emily glanced at him briefly, then back at the room. Would that have changed anything? She asked, and the question lingered, simple, direct. The manager did not answer immediately, because the answer was obvious. It would have changed everything, and that was exactly the point. He nodded. Slowly, understanding settling in. Fair enough, he said quietly, behind them. One of the analysts approached Jason, pointing at a section of the system logs. I think I see what she meant about the loop, he said, his tone careful, not critical. Jason leaned in, studying the lines, and this time, he saw it. Not because it was new, but because he was finally looking without assumption. Yeah, he said after a moment, his voice steady. It is right there. The analyst nodded, then glanced toward Emily, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, not spoken, but understood. Jason leaned back slightly, exhaling, the realization settling deeper now, not just about the system, but about himself. He had not failed because he lacked skill. He had failed because he had dismissed the possibility that someone else might see what he could not. Across the room, a few team members began quietly discussing what had happened, their voices low, reflective, no longer filled with the easy confidence from before, but with something more grounded. One of them said, she saw it in seconds. Another replied, she was not even trying to prove anything. And that observation stayed in the air, because it was true. Emily had not stepped in to impress anyone. She had stepped in because the system needed it. Nothing more, nothing less. The manager checked his tablet again, then looked back at her. There is a leadership meeting upstairs in about 10 minutes, he said. They are going to want to know exactly what happened here. Emily gave a small nod. They already know what matters, she replied, her tone calm. The system is stable. The manager allowed a faint smile at that, recognizing the simplicity in her perspective. While others might focus on credit or recognition, she focused on outcome. And that difference spoke louder than anything else. Jason stood up again, this time walking toward her, not with hesitation, but with intention. He stopped a few feet away, not too close, not imposing, just present. "I was wrong," he said, his voice clear, not loud, but certain. The room did not react outwardly, but the words were heard. They carried. Emily looked at him, her expression unchanged, not surprised, not dismissive, just steady. "It happens," she said, and there was no edge in her voice. No need to make the moment heavier than it already was. Jason nodded once, accepting that, then added, "I should have listened." And this time, there was no hesitation at all. Emily gave a slight nod, acknowledging the truth in that statement. "Next time, you will," she said, and the certainty in her voice made it feel less like a suggestion and more like a quiet fact. Jason allowed himself a small breath, something easing in his posture, not completely, but enough to show that something had changed, not just in the room, but in him. And as the system continued to run smoothly behind them, one thing became clear to everyone who had witnessed it. The most important shift that day was not in the code, not in the servers, but in the way they would see the next person who walked into that room looking like they did not belong. The elevator ride to the executive floor was quiet, almost unnaturally so, the kind of silence that follows something people are still trying to understand. The manager stood beside Emily, tablet in hand, occasionally glancing at her, as if confirming she was real, that what had just happened downstairs had actually happened. Emily stood calmly, her reflection faint in the polished metal walls, her expression unchanged, steady as ever. When the doors opened, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The executive conference room was larger, quieter, filled with glass, polished wood, and the kind of controlled energy that came from decisions worth millions of dollars. Several senior leaders were already seated, their conversation stopping the moment the manager and Emily entered, eyes turning toward them, assessing, measuring. One of them spoke first, a man in his early 50s with a sharp suit and sharper gaze. "We just got reports the system stabilized," he said, his tone direct. "What happened?" The manager stepped forward slightly, but before he could speak, Emily answered, her voice calm. Even in the larger room, there was a rollback loop overriding recovery points, she said. It was isolated and corrected before full data loss. The room went quiet, not because they did not understand, but because they did, and they understood how close it had been. Another executive leaned forward, fingers interlocked. "And you handled this personally?" he asked. Emily nodded once. No embellishment, no performance, just the fact. A brief pause followed. Then the first man spoke. Again, his tone shifting slightly. "You are not listed as part of the on-site response team," he said, his eyes narrowing just a fraction, not suspicious, but curious. The manager stepped in this time. "She was not scheduled," he said. "She was here for a separate meeting." The executives exchanged brief glances, the kind that carried meaning without words. One of them reached for a tablet, scrolling quickly, searching, and then he stopped, his expression changing in a way that was subtle, but unmistakable. He looked up again, this time with recognition. "Emily Carter," he said, reading it as much as confirming it. "Orion Systems." The name moved through the room quietly, not loud, but enough for the others to connect it, enough for the shift to happen. The first executive leaned back slightly, studying her with a different kind of attention now. "We have seen your work," he said, not as praise, but as acknowledgement. Emily gave a small nod. "Then you know why the system failed?" she replied, not challenging, just direct. The executive allowed a faint, almost impressed exhale. "I do now," he said, a slight smile forming, one that suggested both respect and realization. "And I assume you also know how to prevent it from happening again." Emily met his gaze, steady. "Yes," she said, and that single word carried more confidence than any long explanation could have. The room remained still for a moment. Then another executive spoke. "Then we would like you to walk us through it," he said, gesturing toward the screen at the front of the room. Emily stepped forward without hesitation, connecting to the display, her movements smooth, efficient. The screen lit up with system architecture diagrams, logs, and sequences that only a few people in the room could fully follow. but everyone could feel the clarity in her explanation. She spoke without rushing, without overcomplicating, breaking down the failure into something precise, something understandable. Even at that level, there was no arrogance in her tone, no need to prove anything, just clarity, control, and quiet authority. As she finished, the room did not erupt into applause. It did not need to. The silence that followed was enough. One of the executives nodded slowly, then said, "We would like you to stay involved with this system moving forward." It was not a request. It was a decision. Emily paused for a brief moment, then responded simply, "If it helps the system run better." And once again, her answer was not about position, not about recognition, just about outcome. The executive allowed a small nod at that. "It will," he said, and in that moment, the respect in the room was no longer unspoken. It was understood, not because of her title, not because of her presence, but because of what she had done when it mattered most. When the meeting ended, no one rushed to leave, not because they had more to say, but because what had just happened lingered in the air, something unspoken yet fully understood. The executives remained seated for a moment longer than usual, exchanging glances that carried quiet acknowledgement, not just of the system that had been saved, but of the person who had done it without hesitation or demand. Emily disconnected from the display with the same calm precision she had shown from the beginning. No dramatic gestures, no lingering presence, just a simple step back as if her role in the moment had already concluded. The first executive stood slowly, adjusting his jacket. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone measured but respectful, "we appreciate what you did today." Emily gave a small nod, nothing more, her response consistent with everything she had shown so far. The executive continued. "Situations like that reveal more than just technical skill," he added, and though he did not elaborate, the meaning was clear. The others began to gather their things, but their attention still returned to her, not out of curiosity anymore, but recognition, real recognition. As Emily turned toward the door, the manager followed, opening it for her without thinking, a small gesture that would have gone unnoticed before, but now felt significant in its simplicity. They stepped out into the hallway, the quieter atmosphere contrasting with the intensity of the room they had just left. The manager exhaled slightly, as if releasing the tension he had been holding. "That was not how today was supposed to go," he said, almost to himself. Emily glanced at him briefly. "It rarely is," she replied, and there was something in that line that suggested experience far beyond what most had assumed when they first saw her. They walked back toward the elevator, the polished floors reflecting their steps, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, because there was nothing that needed to be filled. When the elevator doors opened again, the operations floor below looked the same as before, but it felt different. The team was still working, systems still running, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations were quieter, more focused, less reactive, more aware. Jason stood near his station, reviewing logs with one of the analysts. But the moment he noticed Emily step out, he straightened slightly, not out of fear, not out of pressure, but out of something closer to respect, the kind that does not need to be announced. He walked toward her, not hurried, not hesitant, just steady. "They know now," he said, his voice calm. Emily gave a small nod. "They always would," she replied. Jason allowed a faint exhale at that, then glanced around the room. "Everyone saw what happened," he said. And though it sounded like a statement, there was something deeper in it, something about accountability, about awareness. Emily followed his gaze for a brief moment, watching the team move with a different kind of focus now. "Good," she said simply. Jason looked back at her, then added, "I used to think experience meant having all the answers," he admitted, his tone thoughtful. "But today," he paused, searching for the right words, "today showed me it means knowing when you do not." Emily met his gaze, steady, and being willing to listen, she added, completing the thought without hesitation. Jason nodded. Once, accepting it fully this time. No resistance, no defensiveness, just understanding. Around them, the room continued its quiet rhythm, but the earlier edge was gone, replaced by something more grounded, something that would last longer than any system alert or crisis. The manager stepped forward again, checking his tablet, then looked at Emily. "Your original meeting is still scheduled," he said. "Conference room B." Emily nodded, I will head there, she replied, turning slightly, but before she took another step, Jason spoke again. Emily, he said, and this time, there was no trace of the tone he had used before, only sincerity. She paused, looking back at him. Thank you, he said, and the words were simple, but they carried weight, not just for what she had done, but for what he had learned. Emily gave a small nod. Nothing more, no need for anything else, and as she walked away toward the next room, the operations floor watched her differently now, not because she had demanded it, but because she had earned it in the one way that mattered most. When everything was about to fall apart, she had been the one who knew exactly how to hold it together, and that was something no one in that room would forget. The hallway outside conference room B was quiet, almost untouched by the tension that had defined the rest of the floor, as if it existed in a different rhythm entirely. Emily walked at an even pace, her steps unhurried, her expression unchanged, and for anyone passing by, there was nothing about her that suggested what had just happened minutes earlier, no sign that she had just prevented a multi-million-dollar collapse, no trace of the silence she had left behind in that operations room. And that was the difference, not in what she had done, but in how she carried it. Inside conference room B, a small group waited, laptops open, coffee cups half full. Mid-discussion, they looked up as she entered, offering polite nods, unaware that the person walking in had just shifted the outcome of their entire day, without them even realizing it. Emily took her seat without announcement, setting her notebook down, listening, observing, as the conversation resumed, but back on the operations floor, the story had not ended. It had only begun to settle. Jason stood by the main console, watching the stabilized system metrics with a new kind of attention, not searching for problems this time, but understanding patterns, the same patterns he had overlooked before. One of the analysts approached him, hesitating slightly. I reviewed the logs again, he said. She caught something we all missed. Jason nodded, not defensive, not dismissive, just honest. Yeah, he replied. She saw what we were not even looking for. The analyst glanced toward the hallway where Emily had disappeared, then back at Jason. Do you think she knew we would not listen? He asked. Jason paused, considering that, then shook his head slightly. I do not think she cared, he said. She said what needed to be said, and that answer stayed with them, because it shifted the focus away from ego and back to purpose. Around the room, conversations were different now, quieter, more thoughtful, not driven by who was right, but by what was right. The manager stood near the glass wall, watching the team with a measured expression. He had seen many high-pressure moments in his career, but very few that changed a room this quickly, this completely. He checked his tablet again, then looked toward the hallway, knowing exactly where Emily was, but not needing to follow, because what needed to happen had already happened. Back inside conference room B, Emily listened as the meeting unfolded, her presence steady, her attention focused, contributing when necessary, but never dominating the space. And yet, even there, something subtle began to shift, not because people knew what she had done, but because of how she spoke, clear, precise, without noise, without the need to prove anything. The kind of presence that did not demand attention but naturally earned it, and slowly, without anyone announcing it, the tone of that room adjusted as well. Questions became more direct, answers more grounded, and somewhere between the operations floor and that quiet meeting room, the same lesson was taking root in two very different places. That value is not always visible, that expertise does not always announce itself, and that the person you underestimate may be the one who sees the problem before anyone else even realizes it exists. Back on the floor, Jason looked at the system one last time, then stepped away from his station, not out of exhaustion, but out of understanding. He had learned something that day that no manual, no certification, no experience alone could teach him, and as the hum of the servers settled into its normal rhythm, he spoke quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Next time, he said. I listened first. No one responded, but the agreement was there, unspoken, shared, and somewhere down the hall, behind a closed door, Emily Carter continued her day as if nothing extraordinary had happened, because for her, it had not. It was simply another moment where she did what needed to be done, without noise, without recognition, and in doing so, reminded everyone who had witnessed it that true capability does not need to raise its voice to be heard. It only needs the right moment to be revealed, and when it is, the room will always go silent.